In this exercise, we're going to apply the 3D rotate command in order to rotate this text in 3D space. Now, if that sounds familiar, if you've been following along with me, it's because it is. We did the very same thing, completely out of context, back in Chapter 15, as you may recall. This time, however, I'm going to show you how we need to take a very deliberate approach to this process because we're already heaping a lot of dynamic effects on top of each other. And every time you add another dynamic effect, it needs to be calculated on top of everything else that's going on. So things become more and more complex for Illustrator. And what we want to avoid are big time delays and, of course, the program crashing. That can happen on rare occasion as well if we're not careful. I've saved my progress as multistrokebevel.ai, and I still have my big text selected here, my multi-bevel text. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the Effect menu, I'm going to choose 3D, and I'm going to choose Rotate. And that's that command that allows you to rotate the text in 3D space. If you wanted to add a beveled edge, you could choose Extrude and Bevel. We're going to steer clear of that command right now because that would really exponentially complicate things. We will take a look at Extrude and Bevel in all kinds of detail in the 3D chapter in the Mastery portion of this series. But for now, just go ahead and choose Rotate. And that brings up this dialog box, and notice it's got a warning. It says gradients will be rasterized. Well, the text is filled with a gradient. Otherwise, we wouldn't see this message. If there was no gradient, the message wouldn't come up on screen. This is a pretty dangerous message. Not because we care whether the gradient gets rasterized or not. That's not really the issue. In other words, whether the gradient is represented as bands of vector colors or pixel colors really doesn't matter that much to us. It's not going to change the quality of the output. What it is going to do, though, is make Illustrator work an awful lot harder. Illustrator, unlike Photoshop, is not good at pixels. Very good at vectors, not so great at pixels. This can really slow it down. So here's what I'm going to have you do. Cancel out for now. And I want you to turn off the fill attribute here inside the Appearance panel. Just click on its eye to turn it off. That's going to give us a very unfortunate result. We're going to see through the fill down to all of these strokes piled on top of each other. So let's go ahead and add another fill. That'll just be a placeholder so that we can get our work done a little more easily. So I'll click on Stroke to make it active, and then I'll click on my fill icon, my Add New Fill icon down here at the bottom of the Appearance panel. You can also press Control/ or Command/ on the Mac, and that'll go ahead and add that exact same fill, that same gradient. We don't want that, so click on a swatch, and I want you to change it to this swatch right here, this dark red swatch, in my case in the first row. Click on it in order to make it active, and that's it. Now we have a flat, solid fill that will not cause the 3D command any problems. Now at this point, you don't want to leave fill selected because then you would just revolve the fill independently of everything else. You want to click on Type instead here in the Appearance panel to make the entire type object active, and then go up to the Effect menu, choose 3D, and choose Rotate again. Notice this time we don't get the warning, which is good news, and we're going to get a much faster preview as a result. Turn on the preview checkbox so you can see what you're doing. Go ahead and set the perspective to 100 degrees, so we have a high degree of perspective. And then I'm going to drag this bottom edge, which is a red edge, therefore we're modifying the red value, that is the pitch of the type. And that allows us to lean the type backward or lean it forward as well. I want to change that value to about 1 degree. Works out pretty nicely. And you may find that these values kind of change themselves when you're trying to change one of the other ones. That's to be expected. Don't worry about it. It just means you have to go back and forth a little bit. Then I'm going to change the yaw value, the green value right there, the rotation around the y-axis, by dragging one of these green edges, these side edges. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate this guy to about -9 degrees like so. And because you have the preview checkbox turned on, you can see a wireframe preview of your text as you drag it around. And you can see all of those strokes are moving on the fly. Actually, it's a pretty cool effect. And now I'll drag this little bitty side area right there in order to get that blue edge. And I'll drag that guy up just a little bit like so until that roll value changes to about 4 degrees. That is the blue value right there, the rotation around the z-axis. So we've got 1 degree, -9 degrees, and 4 degrees. And then the perspective is set to 100 degrees. Then go ahead and click OK in order to accept your modification. Now that moves the text way over there to the left-hand side of the screen. And so what I'd like to do is move it back. Problem is, the text is currently centered. It's exactly where it wants to be. If I press Control semicolon or Command semicolon on the Mac to bring up my guides, I've got this one guideline that's running right smack dab through the center of the document. The point text is absolutely exactly aligned to it. I don't want to upset that. I want to leave it there because then if I modify my 3D effect, which is way down here at the bottom of the list, by the way, I've got to twirl all these guys closed. There's 3D rotate. And so if I move the text and then I decide to modify the effect, I'm going to have to move the text again, back and forth, which means a lot of back and forthing, which also means that my original objects are not in alignment. The point I'm trying to make here is the better approach is to use transform. So virtually move the text. So make sure that your type object is selected, or at least that none of the individual attributes are selected here inside the appearance panel. And then go up to the effect menu and choose Distort Transform and choose the transform command once again. And this time, I'm going to make a couple of modifications. First, I'm going to move my text 66 points to the right. And by the way, you can use the up and down arrow keys in order to nudge the value, of course. You can also press Shift up arrow and Shift down arrow, and that's going to change the value in 6-point increments. Where 6 comes from, I have no idea, but that's how it works when you're nudging here inside of this dialog box. Then turn on the preview checkbox to see what things look like with a movement of 66 points. So that manages to visually center the text here on the screen. And then I'm also going to increase the height of my characters independently of the width by changing the vertical value to 120% like so. And we get this effect here. Then click OK to accept the modification. All right, so far so good. In the next exercise, we're going to apply yet another dynamic effect. One is totally different than anything we've seen so far, called pucker and bloat.